I'd like to introduce our next speaker. She's a nurse, she's a mother, she's a Quaker, and she's an activist. Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Maye Thompson. Hold on. Okay, we're gonna have to work a little harder right here, because I don't know how you guys get down, but I don't get down with that kind of clapping. So ladies and gentlemen, Miss Maye Thompson.
Thank you. I've done a lot of public speaking, but I've never addressed a rally before, so I'm kind of a rally virgin, and you all look like a pretty friendly group. I was on the bus up here from Portland today, and I heard somebody talking about somebody would stand up for 45 minutes and talk amazingly well. I think they were talking about you, and not use any notes, but that ain't me, so bear with me. I am Maye Thompson. I'd like to thank the organizers of this rally and the Occupy movement for taking the concerns that arise out of the tragedy of Fukushima and their meaning for us here in the Pacific Northwest and around the globe. I'd also like to thank the Sampsons, the indigenous people of this area, for inviting us to visit and share this beautiful day with them. When I demonstrated at the Nevada test site in the mid-'80s, it became very meaningful to me to be welcomed to that land by the Western Shoshone, whose treaty rights were also being violated by the existence of the test site there in Nevada. And we are all very conscious that the existence of the nuclear reservation site here also violates the treaty's rights to the gifts of the land, to gather and hunt their traditional foods, the camas, the lomadium deer, and other animals as they have for millennia. And I'd also like to remember one of our own who would be here with us if he was still walking the planet, Dr. Rudy Nussbaum. Rudy, thank you. I miss him terribly. Rudy survived the Holocaust in Europe to become a physicist, a professor, and an advocate for peace. He worked diligently in the 1980s with the Hanford downwinders to document their plight after being exposed to the contamination coming off the Hanford nuclear reservation. Those of you who knew Rudy know he would almost certainly be here today, and in fact, the fact we remember him is proof that he is indeed presente. Presente, Rudy Nussbaum.
Corbin Harney.
That's a name I don't recognize, Corbett Harney. I'm sure there are many. Today I'm representing Physicians for Social Responsibility, and I'm a nurse. PSR isn't just physicians. We welcome all health professionals, and in fact anyone who agrees with our emphasis on preventing that which cannot be cured. We work to address the gravest threats to human health, nuclear war, and the complex systems that promote that war, including nuclear power, climate change, and degradation of the environment. I've worked with PSR on and off for the last 12 years, really in the field of environmental health. I'm a peace person too, but it's the environment I'm really worried about. And for me, that started with another movement called Healthcare Without Harm, which came out of the finding, and again in the late 1980s, that about 20% of the mercury that was flying around in the Great Lakes, actually it wasn't flying around, it was in the sediment of the Great Lakes, was mercury that had its start in the healthcare system and had been incinerated and gone out the stack and flew over the lakes and landed in the water and got changed and into the fish. And some thoughtful health professionals said, you know, we're supposed to be doing no harm and we better get our act together. And so they got to work to green the hospital facilities, to take the mercury out where it wasn't needed, to throw away less plastic into incinerators to produce less dioxin, also going out the incinerator stacks and blowing across the lake, doing more recycling and using less energy and no or fewer pesticides. And in fact, in the Portland office of PSR, Healthcare Without Harm is now working on healthy foods in healthcare, serving less meat and sourcing more seasonal, local, and organic food. Next time you go to the hospital, remember that one. We all know how dismal hospital food can be. Anyway, Healthcare Without Harm got me into the mercury issue, and from there to pesticides, and from there to lead, and then coal, and endocrine disruptors like bisphenol A and phthalates, and polyvinyl chloride, and that got me back to the dioxin again, and a host of other unpronounceable names, and air pollution and water pollution, and stuff in the soil, and chemicals policy reform, and Toxic Substances Control Act, and yeah. And then Fukushima happened. I'm getting ahead of myself. On the job, the opportunity came up for some PSR folks to take the tour out on the Hanford Reservation, and I jumped on it. The Hanford Reservation, I actually have heard that the Chelyabinsk area in the former Soviet Union is the most contaminated nuclear site on the planet, but I'm sure Hanford's right after that. I'm a history buff, so I took the tour and I was pretty overwhelmed. I talked about it for months. You can't be against the Hanford Nuclear Reservation. It's there, it's a done deal. It started at a very dark time in our country's history. It just is. The only thing we can do now is clean it up as fast as we can, as well as we can, do so in the best way we know how, and keep on the alert for complications and better technologies for corralling this stuff. But then we have that thing benignly called the Columbia Generating Station. That brings me to Fukushima, because I didn't know that there was a Columbia Generating Station until Fukushima happened. When that terrible disaster happened last year, I was the person in the PSR office who had the healthcare license, and so they started passing the calls on to me. What should we do? What should we avoid? What's going on? And I'm a public health nurse, and I know a lot about health screenings and vaccinations and family planning and hygiene and infection control and wound care and that kind of thing. But in the 80s, I had demonstrated at the gates of Diablo Canyon, the nuke plant in California, and the Nevada test site, as I mentioned before, with the affinity group, the Sequoia Alliance in Visalia, California. So I had some basic knowledge of radiation and blast zones and plutonium and alpha particles, and so I went to the net and brushed up pretty quickly. But you know what? The actual advice that I had to give people that were calling me on the phone sucked. I mean, that's the only thing I can say. That's a professional term. It sucked. Stay inside. Don't drink water from open sources like the reservoirs we have uncovered in our neighborhood. That's another story. Don't drink milk. Don't eat large leafy vegetables, even if they came from your own organic garden. And worry. That is not okay. I cut out and posted on my office wall a photo out of the newspaper of an infant all pink and blankety and beautiful in Japan being scanned by guys in scary radiation suit, kind of like this gentleman over here by the kiosk. This is not an image any mother wants to see of any infant anywhere on the planet. It just broke my heart. So I started the next part of my travels on the net. What's going on here in the Pacific Northwest? I knew about Trojan. It's in dry cask. Okay, good, sort of. Another done deal we have to keep our eye on, but the Columbia Generating Station license extension had already begun 13 years early. Now you gotta understand, one of the reasons I got into public health is because I'm not an adrenaline junkie. I don't like last minute stress. I don't like people who are dead or dying that I'm supposed to bring back. I like to work on my speeches ahead of time. I like to be ahead of the deadline. But 13 years early, why? Because the French corporation Areva wants to build a MOX plant, a mixed oxide plutonium fuel plant, and they want a guaranteed customer for their product. That's never been said anywhere. You can't look that up on Truth, but that's the only, the license doesn't expire until 2023, and they started in 2010 before Fukushima even happened. That's astounding. So I did what any good activist does. I wrote a letter for our newsletter and formed a committee and made a poster and did some tabling at our Hiroshima Day event in Portland. And I found that about 9 out of 10 people stopping at that table, like me, didn't know that the Columbia Generating Station existed. They don't know which way the prevailing winds blow, or that the Columbia River vies with the Savannah River in South Carolina as the country's most nuclear radioactive river, also because of weapons production. Now, writing an article for newsletter doesn't give you much satisfaction because you usually don't hear much back, positive or negative, but I got an amazing email in response to this article, and I'm going to read it to you a little bit here. I read your article, and when I got to the part that began with, surprisingly, many Oregonians appear blissfully unaware of the last of these problems, even though it poses a continuing threat to the Columbia River bordering our state, to our largest city, and to health of the citizens of the Northwest, I can tell you for certain that there are folks who live with that concern daily. Throughout the years, we have watched, noticing that the state of Oregon is underfunded for individuals with disabilities, underfunded and constantly being nickeled and dimed into a deeper funding hole. I can remember when the downwinders were realizing that there was a bigger problem. It didn't take much to figure that out. I came from downwind of Hanford. I grew up in the Dalles, had an older sister with blindness, and not until I had 6 pregnancies, of which the last one was a live birth, with my son being born with Down syndrome, did I really start putting the pieces together. As we were growing up, we ate salmon out of the river. Our milk was from cattle in the area, and food was grown locally. We swam in the rivers and streams, and our recreation was in the great outdoors. After giving birth to my son, my husband and I attended a meeting for parents of Down syndrome children. It was like a school reunion of people from St. Mary's Academy in the Dalles. A pretty small school at the time. The first thing we said to one another was, "What was in the water?" We talked over the years and found out that our siblings also had lost babies and had brothers or sisters with problems. I would have thought that over the years that both the nation and the state would have been more accountable to the individuals who were brought forth with disabilities and funded for their care. It is like they have a big stamp of Hanford marked somewhere on their body to bring forth an understanding that there was a problem here. It will take individuals with lots of energy and medical know-how to open the eyes of the nation. I hope you will take this on. People of my generation are retiring, and their offspring have been put on waiting lists for services from the day they were born. My son is 38, and we are now at the point where he needs help from those other than the remaining parents. Oregon works on a crisis mode for housing for individuals with disabilities. Nothing is an easy transition, and there is no planning or funds generated by projects like Hanford. Another big why not. You know, I really can't improve on what this woman said. Her words and that photo of that baby above my desk and my kids keep me going. We can shut down the Columbia generating station before it becomes an even more horrifying mess, before we find out that the faults just discovered in this area that communicate with the subduction fault on the western side of the Cascades makes this place a lot more dangerous than we thought, before there are more kids with leukemia or thyroid cancers or diseases caused by exposure to radiation. We must prevent what we cannot cure. We must shut this plant down and do the best we can to clean up this mess. That's why you and Occupy and all the other groups here today are so important. We've got work to do, and we've got to stay on it till it's done. Thank you.